All right, y'all, we are just in the first couple of days of New York Giants training camp, and we already got some injury news coming out of camp to one of the units that really cannot afford to have any injuries in 2025. The New York Giants wide receiver room has definitely been a concern of mine for some time now, and Malik Nabers has been basically the saving grace. Although I wanted to draft a quarterback in 2024, drafting Malik Nabers is really the next best thing. You absolutely check the box on the wide receiver one position for the Giants, but outside of that, we are definitely lacking the necessary superstar talent needed at that position to truly compete in 2025. And entering the 2025 NFL draft, I really thought that wide receiver was going to be a priority for Joe Schoen and for the rest of the front office, with a bunch of guys, that were at the top of that draft class that I really wanted to bring in for the New York Giants. Guys like Tetairoa McMillan, Trey Harris, Kyle Williams, both the wide receivers coming out of Iowa State, and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. I really thought it would have been a really good idea to pair a big body wide receiver 1B with Malik Nabers, especially for the future, considering how young this team is right now entering the 2025 season. But the New York Giants opted to go into a different direction. I also thought that Darius Slayton was going to be the odd man out going into 2025, but we ended up re-upping his contract and bringing him back for 3 more years with the New York Giants if everything goes according to schedule, according to Joe Schoen's schedule. But more importantly, the Giants lack depth at the wide receiver position. And if one of our wide receivers, our starting wide receivers, ends up going down with an injury, the New York Giants are going to be in some serious trouble. And today, we heard that Wandale Robinson was injured yet again and was helped off the field by the trainers. And according to Connor Hughes of SNY, he said that Wandale Robinson was on the ground, frustrated, banging the ground before coming off with the trainers. We also had Bryce Ford Wheaton go down with an injury today, and he was carted off the field. All the New York Giants players taking a knee around Bryce Ford Wheaton as he was dealing with that injury. And when you see players taking a knee like that around an injured player, you can pretty much assume that it is going to be bad news. I'd say the one time that we had an instance where the news was not as bad as we thought it was going to be was with Tyrone Tracy last year with the ankle injury. Now, when it comes to wide receiver play in 2024, we know that quarterback play was a big factor in the lack of success last year. And the New York Giants had, just terrible numbers last year from the wide receiver department, outside of targets and outside of receptions. But just 15 receiving touchdowns all year. That was dead last in the NFL. 9.6 yards per reception. That was dead last in the NFL. The New York Giants, during that 10-game losing streak in 2024, from weeks 6 through 16, our wide receiver core had just one singular touchdown during that stretch of 10 games. That came from Malik Nabers, obviously. Now, again, we know that quarterback play was a big factor, but the big question coming into the 2025 season is, can Russell Wilson fix all of this by himself? Because the New York Giants are returning basically the same starting offense from 2024, except we got a new quarterback under center in Russell Wilson that's going to be replacing Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito, and the fiasco that came with that. Now, Malik Nabers is the one guy that you did not have to worry about in 2024. 109 receptions, 1,204 yards. He only played in 15 games. He had 7 touchdowns while going 8 straight weeks without a touchdown. Like, Malik Nabers really went the majority of the season without finding his way into the end zone, and really had that big game against the Colts where he found his way into the end zone 2 times. Malik Nabers was a guy that was able to create explosive plays, but it was not down the field. A lot of the targets that Malik Nabers was able to get the necessary yak last year was on plays that was short receptions where Malik Nabers would have to do the majority of the damage after the catch. He had the most receptions in a single season in New York Giants history, the most receptions by a rookie wide receiver in NFL history. Malik Nabers is absolutely the real deal. But I'd like to see the quality of targets over the quantity of targets in 2025. Malik Nabers had the most targets to a rookie wide receiver ever. In fact, he had double-digit targets in 10 of his 15 games. So I just want to see Malik Nabers be able to put out the same kind of productivity from a numbers standpoint that he had in 2024, but doing that by getting more quality targets and, like I said, less quantity of targets. Then you got Darius Slayton, who's coming off of one of his worst seasons as a pro. He had 71 targets in 2024. 4.43 targets per game is the second lowest of his entire career. He had a career low 39 receptions, 573 yards, 2 touchdowns in 2024, which tied a career low. Darius Slayton had 8 touchdowns as a rookie. That was a career high, and he has not sniffed that number ever since. But we do know what Darius Slayton is capable of when he does get the necessary targets. And We saw that on display in weeks 5 and week 6 in the 2024 season, where Darius Slayton had 11 targets in each of those games. And in those 2 weeks combined, Darius Slayton came away with 14 receptions for 179 yards and 1 touchdown. But we're hoping that a guy like Russell Wilson coming in at the quarterback position can get a guy like Darius Slayton back to maybe his rookie form as far as getting in the end zone, creating those explosive plays down the field. But that is banking on hope, and we know where banking on hope has gotten us in the past. And then there's Wandale Robinson, who's been primarily operating from the slot and has not really had that true spark that Joe Schoen had hoped for when he drafted him in the 2022 NFL Draft. And I'll never get this out of my mind. He was drafted over George Pickens, who we're going to have to see 2 times this year after being traded over to the Dallas Cowboys. But Wandale Robinson's yards per reception has gone down each year, from 9.9 as a rookie to 8.8 in 2023, down to 7.5 in 2024. And we do know this cannot go without being said that quarterback play has been a big part of this, and also the philosophy of Brian Daboll's offense and how they utilize the slot wide receiver. Wandale Robinson's average depth of target in 2024 was just 5.1 yards. But when you look at it from a glance, Wandale Robinson absolutely did have a career year. 93 receptions, which was a career high, 699 yards, which was also a career high, and 3 touchdowns, which was a career high. And in every season, more than half of Wandale Robinson's yards come from yards after the catch. So he is a guy that can get the ball and go, but with a small wingspan, it makes things a little bit more difficult with the quarterback's accuracy, putting the ball right on Wandale Robinson so that he can catch the ball and go. And targets was definitely a thing in 2024. Wandale Robinson's targets have nearly doubled in each of his seasons as a pro, from 31 as a rookie to 78 in 2023 to 140 targets in 2024. In 2024, the New York Giants were the only team that had 2 wide receivers in the top 15 in targets in the NFL. Like I said about Malik Nabers, I want to see the same thing with Wandale Robinson. Quality over quantity. I think that is extremely important. And Wandale Robinson also led the New York Giants with red zone targets. He had 17 red zone targets on the season. It did result in 3 touchdowns for him. All of his touchdowns came from red zone targets. He caught 10 of his 17 red zone targets. And lastly, the thing that Wandale Robinson has to clean up, at least from what we saw from the evidence in 2024, is the drops. 7 drops on the season. That is also a career high for Wandale Robinson. And then there's Jalin Hyatt. That was my guy, man. A guy that I had a lot of high hopes for, a player that I thought could potentially be a wide receiver 1 at one point when we first drafted him. Jalin Hyatt had just 19 targets in all of 2024, and I really can't figure out why he is in Brian Daboll's doghouse. I know Jalin Hyatt does not have the most well-rounded route tree, but utilizing that speed seems like an asset that the New York Giants could absolutely use. He had just 62 yards, 62 measly yards the entire 2024 season, and just 8 receptions on the year. And half of those receptions came in the game in Germany against the Carolina Panthers, where he caught 4 of his targets for 39 yards. Jalin Hyatt went 12 games with 0 receptions and just 2 games with more than 2 targets on the season. He went from having 16.2 yards per reception in 2023 all the way down to 7.8 yards per reception in 2024. And I think the most disheartening thing here is that Jalin Hyatt has still yet to find his way in the end zone in a regular season game in his entire career. And in fact, he has not had a single red zone target in all 3 of his seasons. Russell Wilson has spoken extremely highly about Jalin Hyatt and about the potential that he has. And all we can do is hope that Russell Wilson can bring out the best in Jalin Hyatt. But hoping for the best is simply just that, and that is not going to bring us results. But if Jalin Hyatt cannot get his act together this year, his time with the New York Giants will absolutely be coming to an end. It really seems like Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are trying to recreate some of the magic that they had when they were with the Buffalo Bills. Malik Nabers is our all-around wide receiver 1, just like Stephon Diggs was in Buffalo. Darius Slayton is our outside deep threat that really reminds me of Gabe Davis, even though they play the position very different. These are 2 guys that have averaged over 15 yards per reception throughout the entirety of their career. And then you got Wandale Robinson in the slot, who is basically the black Cole Beasley. But if one of these 3 starting wide receivers goes down for the New York Giants with a significant injury, the Giants don't seem to have another wide receiver who can truly step up. The schedule, in my eyes, is difficult enough, and I think it might be a good option if Joe Schoen were to go out there and maybe explore which wide receivers are still on the free agent market and possibly bring in another wide receiver. And I think a veteran presence could really benefit the New York Giants wide receiver room. You still got Gabe Davis on the market. And Gabe Davis just turned 26 years old in April. He really matches the timeline of the way the New York Giants roster is currently being built. If you want to go the veteran route, you could bring in an OG like Amari Cooper or Keenan Allen. And I know those guys are getting up there in age, but at this point in time in their career, they are still very productive wide receivers. I think the New York Giants have done a fantastic job with the defense. You've brought in new personnel through free agency and through the draft, and really, Shane Bowen as the defensive coordinator really has no excuses. But when you look at the offense, I'm not sure that Brian Daboll really has the necessary groceries to confidently go out there in 2025 and cook up a nice meal with Russell Wilson at the quarterback position. But at the end of the day, the Giants need results, not excuses.